San Francisco, it's Rex Broadcasting Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Let's get it on! Get it on!
How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer here with Brian Alvarez, and we're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling. We're going to talk about all of the current news, as well as a lot of history, because our guest in the first hour is going to be Shawn, Assael, the author of the new book, Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, The Real Story of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. We're going to talk to him about writing the book, about what's happened, because it's an entirely different business since that book was finished. That hasn't stopped the book from doing very, very well. It was number 48 of all the books, of all the millions of books, a couple of million books, on the Amazon.com charts, and it was on the extended New York Times bestseller list, just having come out. We'll talk, and in fact, Shawn Assael will be going on a big tour starting first thing in the morning to publicize this book, so we can talk about publicity of the book. But if you got any questions...
We're back with Wrestling Observer Live. Give us a call anywhere in the U.S. toll-free at 1-866-OBSERVER. That's 1-866-627-3783. Once again, here's Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Okay, welcome back to the show. I'm Dave Meltzer, along with Brian Alvarez. We're here 2 hours every Sunday night with Wrestling Observer Live, and our first hour guest will be Shawn Assael, author of Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, The Real Story of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. Second hour, we're going to take open lines, so you can be ready with any topic that you want to discuss in the current wrestling scene. And in fact, as soon as we've got a full bank of calls, and we'll start getting the calls in a couple of minutes, but I want to get Shawn Assael on first. Shawn, how are you feeling?
I'm great. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really good. Hey, are you happy so far with the response to your book?
I'm just ecstatic. I mean, you know, I had hoped it would get a little bit of notice. I'm not sure that I expected it would make the Times list in its second week out, so I'm just ecstatic.
Now, you know, one of the things, your book is, I wrote a long review of it a couple of weeks ago.
An excellent review, by the way.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. But the two things about the book, number one, well, the one thing about the book, you're uncovering 20 years, basically, of professional wrestling. It is so much material. I mean, when I was reading your book, I was going like, man, all the major stories are here, and all the twists and turns of, the promotional war here, but, God, there's just so much that you had to edit down into, the size of just a regular book.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the important thing, Dave, is to set out that I was pretty humble in sort of framing the story I wanted to tell. I didn't want to write an encyclopedic book. I just wanted to tell a story. And really what was guiding me was tell the story of how Vince got here from there. For somebody who maybe, a lot of parents who maybe are having their kids watch wrestling and vaguely know about it, but don't really know what's gone into the last, 10 or 15 years since they watched Hulk Hogan in Cyndi Lauper, to try to tell that story, to try to also, for, who remembered wrestling maybe 5, 10, 20 years ago, explain to them how it got here. So it was a pretty humble mission. It wasn't to tell, the whole story, just a good story.
And didn't it start out as just a book covering the Monday Night Wars?
Well, I mean, books are organic. They grow. Yeah, I mean, when I started in 1999, the Monday Night Wars were at a fevered pitch, and I very much had as a model a book that Bill Carter wrote called The Late Shift, which was the Leno Letterman Late Night Wars. So, yeah, it started out as that, and then it kind of grew because as I kept going back and back and back in time, I found so many compelling stories in the sort of early days of WCW when it was owned by the Crockett's, and even when it was, in the NWA years. And so I sort of expanded the growing on me and taking its own life.
One thing that I read in an interview that you did with Alex Marvez, when you actually went and visited Jim Crockett, and, you talked to a lot of the major movers and shakers, Bill Watts, Jim Crockett, from the 80s period. But anyway, Jim Crockett has basically put wrestling out of his life.
Yeah, Dave, it was really very hard to get Jim. It was easier to get his brother David because his brother David is working still with Turner's organization. But Jim had, dropped off the face had dropped off the map, and he was such a pivotal figure. I mean, he was really a connective figure between the older days of the NWA in the South and then the Turner years. And I desperately wanted to get him. So one day, doing business for ESPN in Dallas, and I had heard that he was at a real estate company, and I just surprised him. I knocked on the door, and as he walked out into this anteroom to greet me, he almost looked around furtively like he was scared I would give away who he was. And it turned out he hadn't told a soul what he had done in his prior life. He had just completely left it behind, and all he was known in this Dallas office was as a real estate agent. I was floored at that.
You know, one thing, you brought up writing for ESPN and everything, and on the ESPN website, you wrote a couple of columns on steroids and wrestling, and you got a lot of response, and we haven't actually talked about this. But what, coming out of that, because that may end up being a big major budget, so to speak, for pro wrestling in the next couple of weeks, there are a lot of major league reporters working on the story, a lot of it because of the baseball thing, and the death of, say, maybe Davey Boy Smith and some other people, and one thing that I noticed from reading you did a column and then you did a column on your mailbag is how fervent the pro-steroid forces are that steroids are not dangerous at all.
I was stunned, David. And there was the sort of the typical hate mail that you get when anybody is really galvanized, and those are kind of the emails that are easier to dismiss. What was really staggering to me was the reasoned emails from a large segment of the population that seems to think that they're safe steroids or simply safe performance-enhancing drugs, since I think so many now would probably suggest that we're past steroids into a more sophisticated generation of drugs. But yeah, I mean, they were attacking me for being quote unquote naive or ignorant, or some were telling me I should go on it because there's so many wonderful effects, and I was staggered. And in the context of what I was writing about, I was simply saying that in baseball it's flat out cheating, and I was making that case. But they were trying to bring me in to show me that there is such a thing as safe steroids, and I couldn't get my mind around that.
And here's the thing, it's a subject that not enough research has been done on. When you're young, you only feel the good effects, and the bad effects maybe when you get older. And as far as, is there a relatively safe dosage of this? I mean, perhaps there is. At the same time, when you have guys, and Brian can talk about this as well, when you have guys who are on it 365 days a year, I don't know that that's safe.
Yeah, and I also think a lot of it is that it affects everybody in a different way. I mean, sure, there's probably guys that can use it every day their entire life and live to be 90. And there's probably guys that could go on it for 3 weeks and start falling apart immediately. So, I mean, just the thing, because I read this column too, and I've got, the same sort of emails. And to me, it's like,
that's right,
I don't think it's fair to say it's black or white. It's either one or the other. I mean, it's a shade of gray with that, just like anything else.
Well, that's right, Brian. In fact, I remember when you wrote a similar column. I mean, you got similar type of emails as well from people who you cannot knock steroids to some people at all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that though you can create some sort of moral equivalence here, and make some arguments that you don't have to necessarily back away from. The first one is that it's pro athletes are role models, and it all gets shoved down. I mean, if a rookie feels like he has to dope to keep up with a veteran, then a minor leaguer figures he has to dope in order to get to be a rookie, and a grade schooler figures he has to in order to get to the. So I mean, I think that you can say that baseball needs to get a grip on what it's doing, because the social impact of baseball players doping is immense. I hate to say it, but in wrestling, is the social impact as great? I think that by and large, the public doesn't care about wrestlers the way they care about baseball players. I think that's a tragedy.
That's kind of sad, though, because, I mean, when I've talked to some reporters, and we start talking about, and they start actually investigating what's happened in wrestling, they'll sit there and go, I mean, if this was a real sport, oh, my God. I mean, they'd shut it down.
Well, and that's absolutely a tragedy. I think that there's a difference between wrestlers doping and baseball play because of the number, the 365-day-a-year schedule that they run. They do so much more damage to their body because of the lifestyle, and that's why I think, Dave, have I read that you've suggested from time to time something like wrestling sabbaticals to let guys just get
downtime and tours. Yeah, I mean, I've written it. Other people have written it as well. The idea of when we get that from Japan, because in Japan, what the guys do is they'll do a 2 or 3 week tour and they'll work real hard for those 3 weeks, and then they get 2 or 3 weeks off, and their bodies are hurting on those last week of the tour real bad, but they kind of can know, okay, when this week is over, I'm gonna lay in bed for a week and then I'll go back and train. And But I don't know that that's any...
Here in America, with only 3 weeks off, I don't think anybody would come off anything.
Yeah, well, they're not going to come off, and they don't necessarily come off in Japan. And the other thing is that we've seen Japan as the model of that. The fact is the Japanese wrestlers, they get beat up even worse than our wrestlers. I mean, they're not getting any less injuries. So I don't think that's... I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but it's not... I don't know that it's going to save anything.
Well, my suggestion in the ESPN was whether or not the premature deaths of wrestlers were going to be harbingers of what Major League Baseball players could expect. And I was beaten back by the readers saying that they really weren't analogous, that wrestlers live a much harder lifestyle.
Oh, they do.
And but I still think that I would hope at least that for the baseball community it's a wake-up call.
Before we head to a break, I wanted to ask you, when your book was done, wrestling, I guess the last big story was Vince McMahon's move to the USA Network, or from the USA Network to TNN, and then the book was kind of over, and when we come back on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about the fact that so much has happened in pro wrestling between the XFL and the folding of WCW and the folding of ECW since the book was originally done, and talk about, that aspect of just how wrestling has changed. We'll be back with more right after this. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
Wrestling Observer Live. Email the show now or anytime at WOL@WrestlingObserver.com. That's WOL@WrestlingObserver.com. Now, back to Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Okay, welcome back to the show. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here for 2 hours every Sunday night with Wrestling Observer Live. And I want to remind everyone, if you're interested in the most detailed news on professional wrestling, we cram... Actually, it's like some weeks about the size of half of a book. And that's not an exaggeration. The Wrestling Observer comes out every week, and it's got all the news from our world in detail, and a large percentage, I think, of the listeners of this show are avid readers of The Observer. You can go to WrestlingObserver.com and just click on the thing that says Wrestling Observer. And, in fact, there's a preview up on the website. And Figure 4 Weekly, which Brian does, which tremendous comedy writing on professional wrestling and basically all of the news as well. You can go up to WrestlingObserver.com, and there's information on Figure 4 Weekly as well. And since we're on that subject, we've got Shawn Assael, the author of Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, The Real Story of Vince McMahon and the Wrestling Federation, which just came out about 2 weeks ago. It's already on the extended New York Times bestseller list. It's way up top the Amazon charts. It is the most successful book that I'm aware of on professional by the World Wrestling Federation, and I'm somewhat envious of that because I wrote a book that was not nearly as successful, but that's another story.
No, and it should be, and it is very successful. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. Tributes was something that I kept by my side while I was writing, and it's doing quite nicely on Amazon too. I want to congratulate you for that book.
Well, thanks very much, Shawn. Real quick, let everyone know how you get the book, and I know that you're going on tour first thing tomorrow morning, I guess, to promote it.
I'm going to do I think 30 drive time radio stations in 3 hours.
Oh my God!
But it's a lot of fun. Yeah, the book is on Amazon. It's on BarnesandNoble.com as well, and it should be in bookstores everywhere. There's been a huge rash of it. It's not in your bookstores. Just be patient. It's coming.
Real quick, before we get back to the subject that we were talking about, how much did Mike Mooneyham, who's a good friend of mine, how much did Mike Mooneyham have to do with the book?
Oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. I mean, the book would not have its level of savvy or detail if not for Mike. I mean, I came to Mike when I was not quite halfway done with it, knowing that I just wouldn't be able to finish it on my own. It was just too time intensive. And Mike was just the saving grace of this book. I mean, he filled in so many blanks. He told me so many stories. He wrote some beautiful passages. He's done some of the best writing of his career in this book, and people have said that we're a perfect tag team to it, and I'll agree with that. I really do. Mike, there's so much for responsibility for making this book as lively and vivid as it is, and as insider and smart as it is.
Last 2 years or so, when you pretty much were done with the book, and then everything has changed. Now, was your original title going to be the story of Vince McMahon, or was you were going to have a story more of like a Vince McMahon Ted Turner war, and then there was no Ted Turner?
I'm not so sure. I mean, I really don't. This is my second book, and both times I really didn't bother with the title until the whole book was done. Yeah, I mean, clearly Ted started out being, I suppose, an even character in the book with Vince, but Ted was never nearly as hands-on with the company as Vince wrestling. So the book is not technically a biography of Vince McMahon. It's really a story of how he came to monopolize the industry, and Ted has a fairly large role in the telling that story.
When we go back to the 80s, and I've thought about this a lot, because, living through the changes in wrestling in the 80s from the old territorial system, and a lot of people have some very wonderful memories of it, and I do as well, but it changed. And I don't know, it's a real interesting question. In fact, I discussed this question with Vince McMahon a couple of times. We had some arguments about it in the past, on whether or not, and this would be, say, 1991-ish, where I can remember very fervently a long argument over an hour that Vince McMahon and I had over whether or not Vince McMahon was good for professional wrestling. And when it was over, I don't know that either of us really had an answer, because he changed wrestling, but would it have been better or worse without him? And now, 10 years later...
Curiosity, what were each of you arguing?
Well,
was it like Vince saying he was and you saying he wasn't, or?
It was a lot more complicated than that. I mean, it was just more about, with the territories and everything, and was wrestling really bigger because, less people had jobs. But Vince would say, but the ones who have jobs are making more money, and we get these, big crowds. But then again, you're only getting shows a certain number of times a year when you used to get it weekly, and. His TV ratings were nothing compared to what they are now, or what they or certainly what they were a couple of years ago. But that was the type of stuff that we were arguing. It wasn't really, it wasn't like a heated argument. It was just a long discussion over, exactly what had happened in those previous 7 years, and now it's been 10 years later, and I am not sure that if it had not been for Vince McMahon, if there would even be professional wrestling today, or maybe I don't want to say it would have been bigger because I cannot imagine. The other promoters, ever making it as big as it was a couple of years ago as McMahon and Bischoff as well, with that really hot period. But when we look back, Shawn, last 2 years, really hot period. Now we're in a real back. What would be the story from the outside that you would tell over the last couple of years? And also, what are your thoughts as far as you go back to, in Vince, Georgia Championship Wrestling in '84, when he decided to go national? What do you think the industry would be like today, or would there be an industry?
Yeah, I mean, I was amazed. I went to a place called the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. I think it's in Newton, Iowa, and they had films from the turn of the century with matches in New York City that just had the city, buzzing. I mean, if in 1900 wrestling was big, it was, I think, proportionately as big in 2000, and I think that it's going to be as big in 3000. I mean, I just think that wrestling is a staple of guy culture and always will be. What's happened with Vince in the last couple of years is he simply fed wrestling into the vertically integrated television food chain that starts with Nickelodeon, works its way up to MTV, and the WWF fits somewhere in there. And it's simply become a much more of a consumer, television product, a consumer mainstream television product. Were it to be back in the regional promotions, were it to be on local television more, it would just be different, but it would not be. I mean, this is simply a different kind of wrestling. Vince has brought it much more into sort of the reality television, where you have these sort of strands of fact woven into fiction. In the book, I trace that back to his interview with Melanie Tillman hours after her husband died, and I write, the question Vince asked wasn't really what a wrestler would do. It was more like, what would Primetime Live or Dateline do? And I say that was easy, put the widow on the tube. And I write in that chapter, and it's really one of a couple of codas in the book, that wrestling was crossing a very shaky bridge, and I think that now it's fully crossed that bridge, where you see it now with Bischoff coming back, where there's this final synthesis of fact and fiction into an interesting amalgam. I think that it's bigger in some ways. I think it's smaller in other ways. It's as diverse. I don't think it's as interesting, but it certainly is being fed into the vertically integrated food chain over at Viacom, and that's perhaps the story of the last couple of years, as well as Vince going public. And you can argue it's the final death of kayfabe now that it's a public company focused on short-term profits, and you can also argue that maybe he's robbing himself of some script originality because he has to focus on those short-term profits. And I think you could also argue, as we do towards the end of the book, that he became a mark for his own corporate ambitions. There was a time when the WWF was so top-heavy with management and vice president types and people who had worked at Pepsi and Coke and all these other companies that I think a lot got lost, and Vince had to clean house back to his roots. I'm not sure he's back to his roots yet, but I think he's getting there.
What do you say, or what do you from the outside looking in? And I don't know how much of this you're going to have to answer, and how much the media that talks to you is going to be savvy on this. But as far as is in a sense, I don't want to say a collapse, but certainly a collapse of WWF profitability. It went from being exceedingly profitable to being a company that's going to be, unless things change very quickly, a money-losing company.
Yeah, I was actually I was jarred by in your current issue of The Observer, your phenomenal reporting on it. That if not for the Parents Television Council settlement of $3.5 million, which was revenues, it would have been the first money-losing quarter since 1997. So
for pure wrestling, he actually lost. There was a money-losing quarter with the XFL, but that's different.
Forgive me. No, I should have said that right.
Yeah.
Look, this is a boutique stock. I don't think any of the big mutual funds were getting into this stock because they thought it was going to be a mega mover. I'm not sure because it was a private company before. How he managed the books. I don't think that this is a disaster. I think that we've seen a ceiling in his television ratings, in the cable universe that he operates in. It hasn't gone below a 2.9. It's gone up to a 4.2, I think. He's doing well. I mean, he's still, I think you could rightfully say, the king of cable. I guess your figures this week show pay-per-view revenues down 22%, house shows off. That'll spark. It's a really volatile business plan he's got. I don't think he's on the ropes by any stretch. I just think he needs some new talent. He needs some new storylines, and he needs some good TV people around him. And I think that's another sort of code.
Shawn, we got to hit you a break. Hey.
Yep.
All right, you're listening to the Wrestling Observer live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
You don't know what you don't belong.
We're back with Wrestling Observer Live. Give us a call anywhere in the U.S. toll-free at 1-866-OBSERVER. That's 627-3783. Once again, here's Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here for 2 hours every Sunday night. Our guest is Shawn Assael for the first hour, the author of Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, The Real Story of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. Just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's doing very well, and it's basically a story of the last 20 years of professional wrestling and all of the changes in the business. It's a different product, it's a totally different system, and the TV is incredibly different. It's changed and reinvented itself many times, and one of the big, maybe even the biggest period in the history of wrestling, at least in this country, I would say would be probably 1996 through 1999. It was Vince McMahon was down, WCW run by Eric Bischoff was down, and on Monday night it became the thing when they were going head to head. It was a incredible period of wrestling, and one thing that I will remember is in the middle of all this, and a lot of wrestlers were complaining. I remember in WCW, and this was during a period where. And they were sowing the seeds of their demise, don't get me wrong. But I just remember they were all making money, and Eric Bischoff was saying to a lot of the guys, many of whom are out of work, that you will go back in your lives and you will look at this as the highlight of your life. And, so don't complain about it, basically. And the funny thing is that in a lot of people who are complaining, that probably is true. They're going to remember that period as the big period. Now, Eric Bischoff, to me, I have always credited Eric Bischoff as the one who really got this thing going because wrestling was down and out, And, boy, when Nitro, you had a great story, I remember, Eric Bischoff going to the meeting. In fact, you should talk about Eric Bischoff going to the meeting with Ted Turner and really how Nitro was born and going head-to-head with Raw and forcing this, both companies to really, then, it became, live every week, then 2 hours every week. Wow, there was 5 hours of wrestling on Monday nights that Brian and I were watching religiously, and then it collapsed. Shawn, really quick, what was the birth of Nitro about?
Well, I mean, Eric Bischoff had come to a meeting with Ted Turner, expecting to sell him on a deal to beam the satellite to China, and then that's the deal he thought he was going to talk to Ted about. And then Ted asks him, he says, why aren't we doing better against Vince? This is when he was just on Saturday nights. And Bischoff, who had been invited to the meeting by a more senior executive, he describes it. He says that he couldn't stop the words from leaving his mouth, but he blurted out, "Because I don't know." And the room fell silent. These more senior executives around him just felt, "Oh my God, the guy sandbagged us." But Turner, turned to one of his aides and said, "Well, then give the man Monday nights." And Bischoff talks about leaving that room and saying, "Be careful what you wish for, because you might get it." And after that, a few months later in September, it went on the air.
What would you describe as, I look back at Bischoff, and, now Eric Bischoff's back in the news again, because he's in a real surreal world, as the general manager of Raw and everything like that. But, it's made me reflect back on Eric Bischoff, who did all of these crazy things, and a lot of them worked, and a lot of ballsy moves and all that, and then at the other end, he completely when it was over, WCW is no more, so was it good for the business? In the long run, I guess it was bad for the business.
Yeah, I think you have to say it was bad for the business in the long run. You want to have, a little bit more critical mass than you have now. I think what happened with Eric is, and to some extent, Vince started it when he brought Tyson in, and then, began to hype the music and try to diversify a little bit, is that Eric thought that he could go Hollywood, and it wasn't necessarily a terrible idea if done in moderation. He thought, but he started, having lunches at the Beverly Wilshire with Gene Simmons, striking these incredible deals that could only...
Incredibly stupid deals.
Well, Gene Simmons played Eric, and the smartest man in rock and roll, and you have these scenes in the book where you can imagine Eric, he's been playing with a house's money for so long that he's going to Hollywood with Turner's wallet, and everybody sees him as a mark, and he marked out in Hollywood. There's a scene in the book where they're doing the accounting for WCW, and an accountant's sure he's got it wrong. He does his numbers 4 or 5 times, and he realizes, my God, they're hemorrhaging money. They won't make it, the next month. And a file goes down to, corporate, and it's called the Holy Bleep file, and that's when they realized that they had to pull the plug.
I remember warning. Well, Brian and I both warned them about that. Actually, the funniest part of that was it was so well. They did a run of about 23 straight sellouts. This was in early 1998.
98, yeah.
Yeah, and it couldn't have been better. Vince was starting to catch. I think that Vince was catching up in the ratings. I don't remember who was ahead, but I remember that they sold out 23 straight house shows. Their business they were averaging 10,000 fans per show. And I was sitting there going like, this is the beginning of the end. And people in the company that I was talking to thought, you couldn't be more foolish, you couldn't be more wrong. But all of the, we both saw it, we both talked about it at the time. All the seeds were there. They were not building the future, and this is a business where if you don't build the future, boy, it goes down and it goes down fast. And WWE, perfect example. It went down so fast. It's staggering.
Yeah, and I think that Eric, really was looking for one quick fix after another. The best things about him, I think, is he could be a really inspiring leader, and I think that he was a really good television guy. And I think that's the other sort of subtextual message that I learned in reporting this book. Vince was always at his height when he had the best television people around him. One of the most unsung heroes in the book was this woman, Bonnie Hammer, who was an executive at USA. She had done Sesame Street and public service documentaries before she went to work for Vince at the behest of USA. And she just made him make great TV. She introduced Hot Moments. She introduced great casting and pacing out, but we love it when we see. Eric was like that at a time with WCW. He was just a really good TV guy. But I think he grew too fast into something he wasn't, and then the TV just got harder and harder to watch until the end. I was very nearly watchable.
Yeah, well, they had that whole 1999 was an absolute disaster.
But I guess my larger point though is that good wrestling on TV needs good TV people around it, not just good wrestling people.
One of the things, and it's funny because it was Eric Bischoff's success as a character that caused Vince McMahon to become a character. And Vince McMahon became, as successful as Eric Bischoff was, Vince McMahon was a phenomenal character.
Yeah.
But it also turned into the curse. Bischoff, when you're trying to be a character, you're thinking about what's my character going to do, and you start forgetting about the big picture. And the same thing happened with Vince, in that he was worried about his lines and he was worried about where his character was going, and a lot of the other things, kind of fell apart. And I think that with Stephanie, it's the same thing. And it's like it's the curse of we saw it with all of the old territories. When you had Dusty Rhodes, prime example. When the booker or the writer is also the main television character, it becomes kind of an ego thing, and in the long run, it's always been a killer.
Dave, I'm about to say what I'm about to say with total trepidation, because I don't think I should ever disagree with you with anything.
Certainly can.
Only slightly. I put Vince on an entirely different level as I do Eric or even Dusty when he was running himself through the ground with the old Dusty finishes. And certainly he's not on the level with either Stephanie or Shane. He's an honest-to-goodness television natural. Bonnie Hammer, when she came to work for him, looked him in the eye and said, Vince, and this was before Stone Cold had caught on, she said, Vince, you're your own best character. And for years, he and you know this better than anybody, Dave, didn't want to upstage his acts. He thought that he belonged in the background, to the extent that even in the early days he would dig trenches so he wouldn't over shorter acts, and he would make them look bigger.
Right.
He's a natural on TV, and over the last 20 years, he's built a connection with his audience. Frankly, I think there's not enough of him on TV.
I can't agree with that. Well, right now he's kind of taking himself off for a little while, but
nobody can play a better Vince McMahon.
Nobody ever. No.
Right, and that's right, Brian, and that's where I think Eric fell short. Once Vince got goaded both by Eric and the people at USA to come out on stage, he was so electric that people say that actually the Steve Austin character was Vince. He was so electric that he could pull it off. Eric couldn't, and that's when their roles switched, and Eric began to really fall victim to the old wrestling adage. He believed his act.
Sex, Lies, and Headlocks. We're here at Wrestling Observer Live. We're going to get to the callers. We're going to start with Gene, Stanford, Connecticut. Gene, what's going on?
Yes, I'd like to talk to you about how wrestlers are viewed these days versus we go back 5-10 years ago. Since they came out and said publicly now that it's sports entertainment, there's no question as, is it fake, is it real? I think these gentlemen are getting a lot more respect now, at least for what they do physically in the ring and even the drama they possess, the acting skills, versus years and years ago there was the sentiment that, is it real, is it fake? They're just getting a lot more respect, at the very least physically, for what they do now because of this.
I think that's right. I got asked when I've been doing some publicity on this book, what happened when they declared that this was fake in testimony before the New Jersey Senate. And a lot of the old-timers thought it would be the death knell for wrestling, but paradoxically it wasn't, because it allowed them to start building on real characters. You started to see Scott Hall's called Scott Hall, and you started to see a lot of these guys get known iconically, not for their characters, but for themselves. And then you started to see the athleticism come up. And now, people ask, well, is it a sport? No, but they're athletes. They may not be engaging in a sport, but they're athletes engaging in some exciting athleticism. And so I think that, I think it's actually been good for wrestling, although nobody at the time knew it.
I think one of the problems, though, is they expose it too much on TV. I mean, when you're off TV, if you're doing an interview somewhere, if you're writing about it or whatever, it's great to explain that, hey, this is just sports entertainment. If you're doing an interview with the media or whatever, if Rock's on the Tonight Show. But I think when people sit down to watch the shows, they want to believe. So I think it's a huge mistake to go on TV and do these little things that just expose it as everybody's friends and, whatever.
So shows like Confidential.
Not so much Confidential, but they wrote about something this week where, they cut backstage at SmackDown and the baby faces and the heels are all there together hanging out and talking. I mean,
like actors went back on the air for the first time.
That was different. That was a special show, but I mean, like when Eric came out, or they'll show those crowd scenes, and I think people don't want to think that everybody's sitting there friends backstage, even though deep down they know it. I don't think they want to be slapped in the face with it in the body of the show. Anyway, we have got to head to a break. We've got just a couple more minutes left with Shawn Assael.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, you're very welcome, Gene. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
Big John McCarthy of the UFC, and you're listening to the Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
The Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here for 2 hours every Sunday night. Our guest, Shawn Assael, author of Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, the real story of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. We've only got Shawn for a couple of minutes left. I want to know what your thoughts are. Ever since Eric Bischoff came into WWE just a couple weeks ago, seems it's been quite a change. But one of the things that Vince McMahon seems to have been obsessed with, and Brian Gewirtz, is using Eric Bischoff to rewrite history to their version of history. Such as that he stole, like Hulk Hogan during the trial. He stole all these guys during the trial. It was during the trial, when Vince was, had his mind occupied on keeping his freedom. Made all their big moves when, in fact, all those moves were made years later.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
And, even having Eric Bischoff actually do an interview in the ring, that lengthy interview the first night in, doing basically the Vince McMahon version of wrestling. It's almost like, it's almost like, Vince McMahon is using his television to do his legacy. And I mean, he's done that many times when ratings are down or he has that big 20 speech. It seems like to me, Vince McMahon at his age is trying to, kind of rewrite history.
David, you asked me some of the reasons for the book earlier. Maybe the big to put between two covers something that approximates a reasonable truth about where he's been and where he's going. And we know that he's going to write his autobiography one day, and we hope it'll be truthful, but we can't.
It won't be.
That.
Can't be.
And we can't count.
He can't help himself.
And so, in the course of interviewing 300 people and reading your Observer religiously, we hope we've created something that Vince can't run from, and let him try to recreate his legacy. But hopefully, we've done something that'll give you the real story of how he came to take over wrestling.
Shawn, I want to thank you very much. The book Sex, Lies, and Headlocks is available at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble of your bookstores. It's doing very, very well, and good luck on your book tour. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's a very interesting read. I would say it's a better book for people who are not wrestling historians and general public wanting to kind of get an overview of what's happened in the last 20 years of wrestling. To get it, I think a lot of historians will know a lot of the stuff, but for those of you on the outside, it's a great synopsis, and it's going to be the mainstream history book on this business, I think. Anyway, we will be back. Shawn, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you too, Dave, and Brian too.
Okay, we'll be back with our second hour. We've got a full bank of phone calls, and we'll start hitting those phone calls right after this. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of the Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Let's get it on.
Okay, well, the second hour here of Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We've got a full bank of phone calls. We're going to start getting your calls right. I think I wanted to ask you about a little bit, what is, with NWA TNA, and we haven't even hardly discussed them at all since we started the show, running with weekly pay-per-views on Wednesday. At the beginning of the run, they were talking about break-even being about 50,000 buys, which we said from the start was ridiculous, and they didn't come close to that. So now they are claiming that they can make it on 20,000. What are your thoughts on their long-term, or do you think that they have a long-term?
I think if they can get it down to needing 20,000, I think that they have a longer term. I don't know if they have a long term. I think for long term, obviously, they have to get, like, good TV that we've talked about a million times.
And how's that going to happen?
Yeah, which doesn't appear to be happening. So I think that, anytime you can cut costs, and if you can cut costs so much that your requirement for a buy rate drops in half, I think the chances of them surviving longer is obviously.
Oh, yeah, they'll survive longer. Now, what about the product that they gave on Wednesday night?
I have hated the last two shows, and that's coming from. I mean, when it first started, I was dreading having to watch it because, I think I wrote about this. It's like the Thunder thing. I was always watching Thunder, knowing that this company was dying, and while it wasn't a horrible show, I just hated to have to watch it because I knew that, if I get involved with this and I really start to like the show, it's going to go away. And I didn't want that to happen with TNA, but I watched like the first 4 shows and enjoyed them. And then they had the last 2 Russo shows, and I thought overall they were really, really bad. And I think that the first couple of shows were a product that fans that turned off WCW and maybe turned off WWF, the real hardcores, I think those were shows that they would appreciate and would buy. But the shows now, I don't know. I just see the buy rate plummeting from this point forward.
Especially, and another thing was when you cut back on production. And hopefully, like this coming week, the production won't look nearly as bad. But
actually, let me say one thing about production real quick, because the production did look. It was a fairgrounds this past Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And for a show that is being targeted for real hardcore viewers, I don't think the atmosphere matters to those people. But if they are going to be doing this huge media and all this advertising and try and get the casual fans or fans that have never tuned in, they better fix that production fast.
Okay, we are going to start taking your phone calls right after this. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
Time for more Wrestling Observer Live. Email the show now or anytime at WOL@WrestlingObserver.com. That's WOL@WrestlingObserver.com. Now back to Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Okay, welcome back to the show. 2 hours every Sunday night here on Sports Byline USA and Rex Broadcasting. I'm Dave Meltzer, the editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We have had a lot of patient callers waiting for the first hour to end, finishing our interview, and we're going to start with Ed in San Antonio, who was at the WWE house show last night. Ed, how'd you like the show?
Oh, it was a great show. It was a real good show. All the guys put on, were working real hard. I got to say, I was disappointed on the attendance. I was really expecting a big house. It's been years since it's been that bad.
Well, you shouldn't be disappointed. You shouldn't be disappointed because that's been the story. Pretty much everywhere. San Antonio is no different from Little Rock, Houston. From the Nassau Coliseum SummerSlam, which was a quick sellout. The house show attendance has been horrible. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah, it was pretty bad, but it was a good crowd. Everyone was pretty loud and pretty into all the matches. The 2 guys that sold the show for me last night were Sheldon Benjamin and Chris Nowinski.
Really?
I thought Chris, he was getting like monster heat. He was just only Rico got more than him. Everybody just hated him, and he looked really good. He didn't look as green as he looked on TV. He was pretty, everything looked pretty crisp. And
did you work Benjamin?
And Sheldon Benjamin, he was awesome. He really looked good.
Did you do a lot of good athletic things? What were you impressed with Sheldon Benjamin about?
For his size, for his athleticism, he looked like he'd been wrestling for years. Everything was dead on. His timing was perfect.
Because the key to the next. To the future of the company is the ability to get these guys on television and get people to care about them. They can put them on television, and they haven't really gotten people to care about Randy Orton yet. I guess they did a pretty good job with Rey Mysterio Jr., kind of struggling with Cena.
Actually, they did a damn good job with Rey.
Yeah.
They really did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was real good.
What, with the splash off the cage and everything?
Just the way they portrayed it the entire show.
Mm-hmm.
It was. You haven't seen SmackDown yet, but, they built the show for 3 weeks. They're not really built the show, but they've done the teases for him showing up, and he finally showed up, and they even did the angle last week for him. Came out there, had a great match with Chavo. The crowd was into it, and then they had him come.
That intro was awesome.
The main event. So, yeah, they pushed him harder. In fact, I think they pushed him harder than probably anybody they've gotten from WCW in a long, long time.
Wow.
So.
Okay. On Rey Mysterio, do you think they're going to give him a cruiserweight title match right off the bat, or because it looks to me like
not at not at SummerSlam. That's not the plan.
It looked like they were doing something with him and Test on SmackDown, like maybe if he can beat the big guy.
God, that's a tough one though. I always hated when Rey Mysterio, especially Test. I mean, that's you're talking about a guy who's 6'7" and 285 pounds, and Rey, no matter how much he weighs, he's still only 5'2". And you can only stretch credibility so far.
The best part of SmackDown, by the way, was right before he came out, they had a shot of him from behind putting his mask on. And I swear I thought it was Brock Lesnar putting the mask on. He was so big, and his back filled up the entire screen, and he had the tattoo on it, and it looked just like Brock Lesnar from behind, but it was Rey Jr.
That he's a foot shorter.
Yeah.
I mean, but you see, if he only worked with short guys, and, it's one thing, but when you put him in there with somebody like, Test, I don't know. How did that look like? Because, again, I did a radio show Thursday night, so I haven't had a chance to watch SmackDown yet.
It looked like Rey with Test.
Well, that's not good.
Well, they didn't look as bad as, like, him and Kevin Nash.
Well, Kevin Nash is a giant. Ed, we got to move on, okay?
And Rey was a lot smaller back then.
Okay, that's right. Let's go to Alan in Deerfield, Florida. We're good.
Who's in the limousine at the end of SmackDown?
I actually don't know the answer, but maybe. I was thinking about it today, and I was thinking maybe Jericho. Maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking Jericho, too. And I also wanted to ask you, there's a story that was on Tony Atlas's shoot interview about Bruno Sammartino and Dominic DeNucci hanging Vince McMahon Sr. upside down outside of a hotel, by the ankles, kind of, because he didn't pay them the money.
I've never heard that story. I mean, I don't, and that's probably a story that I might have heard. I mean,
Tony Atlas credible?
Not always, but that is an old wrestling story that's probably been told about every bad promoter, and it's probably been true in some cases. Like, I always heard about Nick Goulas, about somebody went in there and hung him upside down to get his money. I don't think that the story would... If it was Vince Sr., I think it would have been a pretty well-known story, so I would say it's probably not true.
Okay, and also you guys were talking about, people knowing that guys are friends. I mean, there's still some blow-ups in the dressing room, so guys don't always see eye to eye, right? I mean...
Well, just there's blow-ups like everyone has at work. I mean, guys, there aren't that many locker room fights. I mean, they're actually pretty rare, and, so...
But not everybody gets along.
Well, it's like in any workplace. Not everybody gets along. You've got everyone's got their little clique, basically, that they hang out with, and they've got their friends, and there's the resentment and jealousy and everything like that, because this is just the nature of the business.
Right, for, Savage and Hogan, I know they had a once, right?
I don't know that they had a fist fight, but I've heard, that's another story, and it, but Savage did hate Hogan for years. That's true. But then they did business together for years afterwards, and then they hated each other again. And if they did business again, they would like each other.
Hogan,
Yeah, it's like everyone with Hogan. People hate Hogan until they think they can do business with him, and then they like him.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, very welcome. Let's go to Bob in Chicago. Bob, what's going on?
Hey, guys.
Hey.
Real quick, have you seen, either of you guys seen Confidential?
I watched Confidential last night, yes.
Okay. Did you think it was another part of rewriting history when they said DX?
Oh, yeah. I don't know, Brian, if you saw this last night. What changed the wrestling war was the day DX went, and invaded the Norfolk Scope, and they were out.
Oh,
it was totally
one thing that they promised last week that turned the entire business around.
Yeah, and what was interesting about that piece is they clearly had built the idea of a piece to reunite DX weeks ago because they had Sean Waltman on the piece all over the place.
Uh-oh.
And, and then they threw in the Eric stuff because, Sean Waltman was gone from WWE a week before Eric got there. And Eric's out there, and Eric is kind of talking about, it's really weird because, the night in Norfolk, remember that they did that thing where, I don't even know if you remember this, but I actually was involved in a lawsuit, but they showed, free tickets, right? And they said WCW Nitro free tickets, right? Yeah. And they went on Raw, and they were saying how, everyone gets into Nitro for free. And this was actually the time when, a year later, that was true. But at that time, that's when Nitro was still really hot, and, it was a legitimate...
Raw for free.
What?
Everybody was getting into Raw for free.
at some Raws, yeah, at that point. But anyway, at Nitro right now, they weren't papering tickets. But anyway, they show the thing where they go, they show that little clip where they superimpose it and says, free tickets, WCW Nitro. And then they go to a clip of Eric, right? Like he's responding to it, and Eric goes, They found out our secret. Like that. So it's basically Eric acknowledging that they were giving all the tickets away for free. Well, later they did, frame was, but they tried to act like it was, they tried to...
They may have edited it so that he was talking about something else, too,
Easily. I mean, it was, but yeah, they tried to make it like that was what changed the wrestling war, was that day that they came over. And that was like a...
Fuck wrote that.
The thing is that made me mad. It's part of more of the Hunter is the number one star again in our business.
Yeah, it was. Hunter was the one who changed the wrestling war on that night. That's right.
There are more better nights than that. I will say that was part of it. But there are other nights, like when the night after WrestleMania 14, when Shawn Waltman came out and ripped WCW.
That was a big one. The forming of DX. But the thing is, what changed the wrestling war were WCW writing terrible television and WWE writing good television. And and all that other stuff was part of all this. But that's ultimately that's what happened.
Dave, I wanted to ask you real quick. The other night that I always look at, as far as the time you knew that WCW was the loser, was the night, the first telecast of Raw and Nitro in 1999.
Yes. Yes.
Won the belt.
And they brought it up, and they didn't even realize how absolutely inane and stupid they were to bring it up. And they talked about that again on TV.
And then they did that, and then see, I never, Mick Foley was the champion. It's like, they've got a loser.
Turn the channel to see it.
And then they have
the one finger touch
at the end of the show for a 47-year-old guy, that most of the audience had rejected.
Yeah, the one
champion. And I was wondering, is there anything in the book, Shawn Assael's book, that describes certain dates, what was happening in Nitro, what was happening in Raw?
Some, and I think that he talked about that one as well. I know he talked about the stupidity of of announcing that Mick Foley was going to win the title. I don't remember how detailed he went into the one finger touch, which was on the same night. But that was, WCW was already losing by then, but that was a major thing because that was
they were still getting 5.0.
But they were getting, but they were still competitively losing, and it stopped being competitive very shortly after that. Yeah. We got to take a break right now. We're going to be back right after this. We're going to be taking all of your phones. This is Wrestling Observer Live. We're here every Sunday night for 2 hours. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
Even when it doesn't taste good.
Even when it doesn't taste good. That was the end of a promo right there. How you doing, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter. I'm here with Brian Alvarez. We're here for 2 hours every Sunday night from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 to midnight Eastern Time with Wrestling Observer Live. And we got a full bank of phone calls. I want to remind everyone, if you're interested in our Wrestling Observer Newsletter, you can go to WrestlingObserver.com. It's the most detailed look at the world of professional wrestling. And Figure 4 Weekly, which Brian writes, it is one of the highlights of my week every week is reading Figure 4. When I get it, that's it. I'm not going to, I cannot be talked to. I cannot be bothered until I'm done reading that thing from cover to cover. It's just really entertaining. If you read it, you just get a kick out of the sense of humor. And it's got all the wrestling news and Brian's opinions on everything. And Brian's opinions is, if you listen to the show, Brian's opinions are right on most of the time.
Did you get any emails about Shawn Michaels this week, by the way?
As far as the Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
I did not get any emails about Shawn Michaels in the Hall of Fame, but that's an interesting discussion because I want to tell you something. We do a Hall of Fame in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and it's actually, among historians of wrestling, it is the Hall of Fame for professional wrestling because it's voted in by people who really know what they're talking about in almost all the cases, except for Shawn Michaels. And
I did convert one person this week, though.
Did you? Well, okay.
They emailed me.
What I could tell you, originally, I started doing the Hall of Fame in 1996. Basically, seemed like a good idea at the time, and it turned into like one of our most hotly debated, issues. And every year, for the first couple of years, I would basically pick, I picked the first class and I picked guys, and then there were always arguments. And I said, you know what, I'm going to get writers together, wrestlers together, former wrestlers, and it's basically a conglomeration, usually about 100, 110 people doing votes, and you got to be pretty darn good to get 60% of the vote, let me tell you, because there's no one gets in now that doesn't deserve to get in. if anything, guys don't get in. And the one, the most controversial one was Shawn Michaels. I think the first year that he was eligible, I think he missed by one vote. And I thought at that time, that's okay. He'll probably get in next year. And the next year he missed by a couple of votes. And I thought, it's okay. Okay, last year he didn't really come close to making it. And I actually thought, you know what? Even though I voted for him last year myself, and I know Brian did, last year, he was going to make his big comeback, and then he was, in bad shape, whether it was drugs, alcohol, whatever, in the dressing room for his big comeback. And, the ballot was only a couple of months after that. And I thought that, it's going to be really hard to vote for Shawn Michaels, and it's really easy to justify, based on this, not voting for Shawn Michaels last year. Now he's back. He's doing fine. He may or may not wrestle again. But, Shawn Michaels, you can talk about almost anything. Shawn Michaels was one of the greatest in-ring performers this business has ever seen. One of the greatest. He was a good draw. He was super charismatic. I hope that... and it is a black eye, I think. I really do.
Yeah. I watched that tape, and he was so great. And the funny thing is, I gave the tape to another friend of mine who's been a wrestler forever, and he watched the tape, and he came back and he said, I thought this was the best of Shawn Michaels. And I said, well, it is. And he goes, no. You should have seen blah, 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 blah. And he started rattling off about 100 other matches which weren't on this tape, and I just thought, why is this guy not in the Hall of Fame?
Well, part of it, last year, Shawn, a lot of people hate Shawn Michaels.
I understand why some people wouldn't vote for him.
It's really hard to get, I want to tell you something, it's really hard to get active wrestlers to vote for Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
And they should. But, there's a lot of resentment there. And you know what else? It's really hard to get veteran wrestlers. It's actually the people who are not the wrestlers that vote for Shawn Michaels the most.
Yeah.
The people within the business. In the business, his rep is not that good. Even though, my God, very, very few guys are better. I'm thinking the best wrestlers we've seen are Ric Flair, Ken Kobashi, and maybe Kawada, Shawn Michaels. But he's right up there, and he's got to be one of the top 10 performers that this business has ever seen. He's got to be.
Yeah.
So that means he's in. He's in. I think Benoit should be in too for the same reason. Even though Benoit didn't have, Benoit doesn't have the big drawing career on top or things like that. But my God, it's like,
Well, I don't think he'll ever have a problem eventually getting in.
Yeah, it's 15 years of great work. Yeah, but people are always knocking him because he's not a big draw, and he's not. But it's like, to me, if somebody in baseball was a great singles hitter, Rod Carew, okay, and Brian, I know Brian's not a big baseball fan, but he doesn't have to hit a lot of home runs, and they don't say, okay, you didn't hit any home runs, so you can't be in the Hall of Fame. It's like, if you're in the ring that great, you should be in. If you're Hulk Hogan, who was not great in the ring, but such a phenomenal draw, you should be in.
Yeah.
I think it works both ways. Let's go to Nate, who's going to talk about another guy who probably will be in the Hall of Fame someday, Dwayne Johnson. What's going on, Nate?
Hi, good show, guys. I was just going to make a comment and ask you a question. I guess I sort of felt the same way you did when The Rock returned about the promos. It was sort of like, oh, God, go make a movie or something. But
yeah, the first promo wasn't that good.
Yeah, I was disappointed. I'm a fan of his, too.
Me, too. I'm a big fan of his.
But the three matches this last week, the one with Angle, the one with Guerrero, and then the pay-per-view were just unbelievable. And I guess my comment is, this is really, the shows were really good this week in general, but I feel like part of the reason the shows were better is this is the first time with the split shows where the world champion sort of traveling from show to show actually made sense to me.
Because it was a world champion who was having great matches. Because you got to remember, since the split, we had Hunter, who wasn't really having great matches. Then we had Hogan and Undertaker. And they weren't having good matches.
And obviously they're doing the stuff with him and Lesnar, but just in general, with him out there with the belt, it just felt like, okay, here's the guy that should be on both shows with that belt.
Yeah.
And boy, Eddie Guerrero, what a great performance he did on Monday night.
Yeah.
On Monday night, that we haven't even talked about that. That Raw was a tremendous show.
Oh, the best show that they've had on television, I can't even remember one. Maybe like last year.
Yeah, but what scared me watching it was, It's a restart show, and restart shows are always great, and restart shows usually do great ratings. And when you do too many restarts, it usually works against you. We saw that with WCW. And I know we're going to have another restart, and I hope, I just want patience. I want this angle to play out, and I just have this feeling that it's going to be another one of these angles where, 8 weeks from now, Vince is going to wake up and just go, well, this angle's not working.
Well, SmackDown was the fourth show after the restart, right? Raw, SmackDown.
Yeah.
Yes.
They've all been good.
Yeah.
And the SmackDown this week was just as good. I mean, in a different way. But the thing with
SmackDown was a more wrestling-based show.
Yeah. And the thing, I guess I'll just leave, but I just want to ask if you guys could give an opinion at this point on the SummerSlam main event, how it's shaping up, or just
Rock and Brock.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Rock and Brock, and Brock Lesnar had a good match on pay-per-view with Rob Van Dam.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they can have a really good match. I don't know. I don't think it'll be. It's not going to be the match that they just had on the last pay-per-view. There's no way. It's impossible because you don't have Kurt Angle in there. But hopefully they'll have a good match. Hopefully they'll set everything up for the future, and we'll see. I mean, Brock is getting the thing handed to him, and a lot of people probably resent it, and he isn't ready, and there's no doubt about that, and no one denies it. But it's time to create a star, and hopefully it'll take.
Okay, just one quick thing, and then I'll go.
Go ahead.
Sorry. That last sort of angle with Rock and Lesnar in the ring, he made Rock look like he was about 200 pounds. Did you guys notice that?
Yeah, well, Rock's a little bit
now.
Yeah, well, Rock's a little bit lighter, and because he's doing acting, and Brock's a monster.
Well, thanks, guys.
Okay, you're very welcome, Brian. Why don't you?
Hunter, right before he won the title, that one year where they pushed him the entire summer towards SummerSlam, is watching every show going, he's not ready, he's not the guy. Then he won the title, and about 4 months later, he was the guy. So I think they could do with Brock.
Well, Hunter was a better worker than Brock Lesnar, and there was a Mick Foley in the mix then.
That's true, but we got a Rock in the mix now.
Yeah, only for a while, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to be out doing the movies. Anyway, let's go to Mark in Springfield, Vermont. Mark, what's going on?
Hey, guys. Actually, this is Chris.
Oh, it's Chris in Savannah, Georgia. I'm sorry.
But, hey, no problem. I was wondering, Brian, you said that this past week's TNA was horrendous, and while I agree with you that it looked bad on TV, there was some lowbrow humor, and, we could go on and on about the racial stuff, but, I mean, I found that there was a couple of really redeeming qualities to the show. I mean, did you?
Like redeeming? Yeah, I mean, I like the opener. I just think the biggest problem for me on the show is the Russo stuff, which I think is unnecessary, the swearing and everything like that. And also, as far as in-ring, I thought that the matches are just too long. I mean, I sit there and I watch them, and it seems like an hour later I'm still watching the same match. And if you have guys that can go that long, that's one thing. But, I mean, the Flying Elvises, they can't go 25 minutes or whatever it seemed like.
The problem was the crowd was dead.
Yeah.
It really hurt the show. And I think that hopefully that will be addressed, because what happened stuff, and the crowd live, because there were no screens, didn't see the backstage stuff. Because I was talking to some people there, and we're going, it's like Nashville, hot Nashville crowd, right? That's what we've always heard about for years. And this one, it's like, except for the first match, didn't have that, and that was the excuse they gave me. So hopefully it's going to be rectified, because, yeah, the Elvis's match, I think with a hot crowd, that would have turned out to be a good match. It told a little bit of a story. It probably was too long, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have a show with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And when you're on free TV, you can afford to have some shows that are bad, but not when you expect people to pay $10 every week.
I know. And I don't think that show was a step in the right direction at all. And work in progress, man, I don't know. That didn't work for XFL. It didn't work for a lot of people.
The invasion.
Yeah. Anyway, you're listening to the Wrestling Observer live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
We're back with Wrestling Observer Live. Give us a call anywhere in the U.S. toll-free at 1-866-OBSERVER. That's 1-866-627-3783. Once again, here's Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here with Wrestling Observer Live hours every Sunday night. I want to thank all of you who've called. We have had full phone lines from the beginning of the show till this moment. We're going to whip through these calls as quick as we can. We're really going to go to Mark in Springfield, Vermont now. Mark, what's going on?
Not much. How you guys doing?
Doing really good.
Great. You guys scared me for a second when you were and you said that there was no Mick Foley, and I looked down the roster, and the only one even remotely like that is Kurt Angle. And if they use Kurt Angle to build up Brock, that's gonna be so terrible.
Well, they're not going to do it in that way, because Mick Foley at that point was. There's two things about Mick Foley. Number one is Mick Foley understood his role in the company was to get guys ready for big matches. Like, he got Rock ready for Steve Austin at that WrestleMania. And at that point in his career, he knew he had only a couple of matches left, and he was going to make them good ones. and he thought the greatest thing he could do for wrestling, being that he was going out, was to make the world champion as strong as he could. And so he did. He gave Hunter super matches, and Hunter was end.
Right.
And he put him over clean time after time after time. Kurt Angle is not leaving wrestling, I don't think. I mean, he's talked about, going to the Olympics. I don't believe he's going to do it. And so and there's people in the company who think he's going to be the man. So he's not there to be, no one's out there to sacrifice Kurt Angle, but they do also believe that they can beat Kurt Angle, then Kurt Angle's so good that, he can come back and it'll be just fine. Like Ric Flair. Yeah.
Right. That's what I was thinking. I have a couple of really quick things to ask you about. One, earlier you guys were talking about maybe Jericho being the guy on Raw.
Yeah, it might be.
I guess tonight on Heat, Jonathan Coachman pretty much eliminated all the guys who were in and around the ring at the end of SmackDown.
Was Jericho was in SmackDown?
He was, right, well, they were leaving all of the anti-Americans. So.
Okay, well, then there you go. Then, God, I hope it's not, I wonder if it'll be Hogan.
I know. One last thing.
How did Coachman eliminate him, by the way?
He said they were speculating about it during the hardcore match, and he said that the ones who they knew it wouldn't be were the guys at the end of the show on SmackDown, and he named Jericho, Edge, Test, Lance Storm, Christian, all of them.
Okay.
Or that means for sure he's going.
I don't think so. Well, I guess we'll find out.
Regarding SummerSlam, right now I know it's probably up in the air about Shawn Michaels possibly coming back. I just wanted to on whether or not you thought he would wrestle at SummerSlam, and if you don't think he's going to, what do you think Triple H is going to be doing on that show?
I hope he wrestles because everyone wants to see it. I mean, if he's not ready to wrestle, they shouldn't have done the angle. I don't know if they should have done the angle because I hate when they build up a match, and now, for a while there with Shawn, everybody kind of talked about wanting to see Shawn wrestle. But then when Shawn did the thing with Big Show the other night, it kind of made you, God, I really want to see Shawn wrestle now. And then he did the thing with Triple H, and it's like, I want to see Shawn get revenge on Triple H. And that emotion, if they don't give that to you, to me, it's like it's a waste of an angle.
Another thing is that angle there was like, they pay-per-view. Then they broke up the very next night, and to me, it's like that's something that they should have done. They could have got a little bit of mileage out of it.
They could have got a lot of mileage out of DX. I mean, not long term, but yeah. I mean, I think Hunter wanted to be a heel really quick. But
either that, or the only reason I could think that they would do it so quickly is to do SummerSlam.
Well, hopefully you're right. Hopefully that's the reason.
He's got to know that it's now or never after the reaction with the Big Show thing and with the Triple H.
Well, he's never going to be younger.
Right.
And
you're probably not going to react the same way. If they tease it this time and don't give it to them, when are the fans ever going to react like that again?
Yeah, and there's not going to be. Yeah, you're right. I think it's the time if he's ever going to do it. And if he wasn't going to do it, should be teasing it on television.
And Hunter, sure, I think they can do the match.
Okay, I want to thank you very much, Mark.
Yep, thanks.
We're going to go to Chris in Baltimore. Chris, what's going on?
Hey, what's up, guys?
Not too much.
Unlike you, I did like the NWA TNA pay-per-view this week.
Okay.
It's my first time I watched it. I had a bunch of my friends over, and we all enjoyed the cruiserweight match. The first match was incredible with Red and Loki. It's my first time seeing Loki.
I've seen better, because I saw their Ring of Honor match that was like off the charts, and it was a better match than that one. But it was a good match. It was the best match on the show for sure.
And did you hear anything about XPW coming to Philadelphia?
They are, aren't they? I think there's some hold up as far as getting a license and things like that.
Yeah,
but
I heard he told me that they haven't gotten a license yet, and they are advertising the show.
I have heard that, and promotions sometimes do that, and but a lot of times, I've seen promotions not get a license, and somehow they pay off like they get a local promoter's license and still run the show anyway. So
yeah,
we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I've heard the same thing that you've heard, and they have a date booked or announced, and Shane Douglas and Terry Funk, on top.
From their website, they say they're moving their base of operations from Los Angeles to Philadelphia.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that
I find that one kind of hard to believe.
It's kind of weird. They kind of did an angle to do that. XPW is kind of a psychotic brainchild of Rod Black. It's not like they're to make any money.
They are charging for second row and 30 for third row in that building.
Yeah, but they're going to end up papering the building anyway, and everyone knows it.
Yeah.
That's what they do in California. They paper the whole building. So, charge. I guess they charge whatever they can for the first couple of rows because people will pay it. But in the end, I mean, that's what their history is.
There's going to be a lot of loyal ECW and CCW fans who are pretty much going to boycott that show.
I've actually heard the rumors that CZW fans were going to, well, you can't boycott the show, but I mean, I heard that there's like some CZW fans that were going to try to get the freebies and try to ruin the show, which should make for an interesting night if that indeed happens.
Yeah, that would be. Well, I'm going to let you guys go because I know short on time.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. We are going to go to Rob in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Bret Hart and a truckload of other wrestlers. What's going on?
Nothing. Thanks, guys. You're right. Actually, I hope Lance gets more of a push. I think he's one of the better talents.
Well, he's getting it now with the Team Canada gimmick, so.
Exactly. Well, one question I wanted you guys to know, is there any possibility that Rey Mysterio Jr. and Dean Malenko would ever have a match again, hopefully on SmackDown?
Dean's pretty much retired. I would say unlikely. I mean,
it's too bad because that would have been a great first match for Mysterio.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right because he knows how to work with them. I think I think Dean's retired. I don't think that they'll wrestle.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Actually, you guys mentioned Tony Atlas, something else earlier in the show. Something I always wanted to ask you guys. A long time ago when Rock was first champ, he had the match, I believe, against the Sultan. Tony Atlas was in this corner. Was that like an angle? Were they doing anything with that?
God, I think that they wanted to do something where because Tony Atlas was Rocky Johnson's tag team partner, and that's kind of how they tied together. And I don't remember exactly where they. Would you remember where they went with that?
It just stopped like 2 weeks after. They showed him on Raw. He was kind of staring at him.
Yeah, I think it was a way to get like Rock over as like kind of endorsement or something like that. But they did that. Remember they even did a thing once with Rock and Rocky Johnson, and they never went anywhere with that either.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Okay, you're very welcome. We're going to go to Jimmy in Houston, Texas. Jimmy, what's happening?
No, this is Benjamin.
Jesus Christ. Benjamin in Tempe, Arizona.
I'm just wondering, is there like a backup plan in place in case the Brock push just goes south? They decide to like put the title like back on Angle or something, or? Well,
if it does, it's not like there's a backup plan, but they'll do that. I mean, that's kind of everything's booked week to week, and if Vince wakes up one morning and says that something's not working, then they start at square one all over again. I think they've done that too often.
Unless it's Friday, because then by Saturday he could change his mind again.
Yeah.
I also had another question. I watch TNN a lot, and I'm not positive, but I swear, is Mick Foley doing their promos now?
Yes, he is. That's his voice all over TNN. Yeah, that's
voice of TNN.
Yep.
Did WWF get him that deal?
No, he got it himself when he started. They offered him that as part of the deal, and I talked to him about that not too long ago. He loves his new job.
And is he completely released from the WWF at this point?
Technically, his official release will be in December, but he's really released. Yeah, I mean he can't wrestle for anybody else, and nor does he have any inclination to do that. There's some things that he can't do yet, but overall, for the most part, yeah, he's released.
I have just one other question. I listen to you guys on the internet, but sometimes it's hard to connect sometimes. Do you guys have any plans in expanding into a radio station out here in Arizona? Or is
we would love to. If any radio station wants to pick us up, you can contact people at Sports Byline or at Rex. They can put together a deal. But yeah, we would love it. We would love to get more radio stations.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay, very welcome. We're really going to Jimmy in Houston, Texas. What's going on?
Hi, this is Jimmy. I had a question. I guess down here in Houston we got a couple of independent federations. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. You've seen one called Elite Wrestling Federation?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, well, they've got one guy been making kind of a big splash lately, Big Brick Taylor. Do you know too much about him?
No, I don't.
No, because they've been, promoting him pretty hot and heavy lately. They've also been bringing in some other big name stars. I guess they've got Lawler advertised again soon, but I don't know if they can really do that or if it'll really show.
Lawler will show. Lawler's working against every weekend. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Real quick, that other caller was talking about the Tony Atlas angle. I think they were hinting at like an Atlas Rock feud, because I remember there was going to be some kind of jealousy or something with Atlas and the Rock, and then they just kind of dropped the angle.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think there was something about that. Also, real quick, ObserverLiveChat.com. Just want to get that plug out of the way.
Okay.
And I want to talk about the guy in the limo. Nobody's really mentioned Brock Lesnar, but I kind of think it's Brock Lesnar.
I got like a ton of emails today from people who said that they thought it was Brock Lesnar.
I think it makes the most sense, only because it's like it could be that Hammond's kind of playing Stephanie and Bischoff against each other to get his guy on TV a lot. And
the other thing is that Lesnar's booked on all of the Raw house shows.
Right, and plus it gets him to like about 8 shows to build up the SummerSlam main event instead of 4 if he's on.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
He's going to be on both shows at the same time. I mean, that's not the worst idea, but if, boy, you know. Oh, the idea he's playing both back and forth and he's going to be on both shows while that's going on.
Right, since Rock's going to be on both shows.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that's but the problem is that once you do that, you know, you're taking away the separatism again.
You know, I'm surprised he almost didn't do that with Hunter.
Yeah.
Like, have him jump to SmackDown and go, he lied, he actually did sign the papers, it wasn't divorce papers. He's a heel now.
Yeah.
Well, there's nobody else on SmackDown that makes sense other than, like, Hogan, but that's still not that big of a deal. And, you know, really Jericho, but he's tied into that other angle, and I think he's better with that whole, the Edge scenario and the Team Canada thing. So I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. The other thing, you said you saw it confidential. I was just wondering what you thought about the comment that Randy Orton Sr. made about how Randy Orton is, I'm not Randy Orton, whoever it was.
Bob Sr. said that he was a better wrestler than Luthez?
Better wrestler than Luthez.
That was pretty funny.
I remember laughing and I don't know. I mean, I never saw Luthez wrestle, but I think...
You know, I mean, it's like, you know, if you watch a tape of Luthez, you would actually, in some ways, say that Randy Orton's a better wrestler, because it's just primitive stuff in comparison. But, I mean, wrestling, I mean, my God, you know, nobody would ever say that Randy Orton's a better wrestler than Luthez, and for their era, it's got a long way to go to be the top guy.
Yeah, and also, was Bob Orton, was his father as good a wrestler as they were putting him over last night? 'Cause I don't remember. I mean,
Bob Jr. was a great ring technician. Yeah,
okay.
it was. Yeah. Chris, we got to head to a break. Okay.
All right, take care. Thanks.
Okay, you're listening to Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.
Time for more Wrestling Observer Live. Email the show now or anytime at WOL@WrestlingObserver.com. That's WOL@WrestlingObserver.com. Now back to Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Okay, we only got a couple of minutes left in the show. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here with Observer Live 2 hours every Sunday night. By the way, Reports Byline USA, Patrick Morrow's video game show will be live, so you can stick around for that. And we're going to go to Kennewick, Washington, and Brian. Brian, what's going on?
Hey, I was wondering, last night on the WWF show, they were talking about coming up in WWF Magazine. They have a special on Steve Austin, and also next week they have an interview with Vince about Austin. Is this legit? Did he really quit, or?
Oh, Austin quit. Austin walked out before the TV taping when they were in Atlanta, and you know, everything that they've done since then, that's been real. You know.
Okay, and also I want to know. No, I'm going to the Raw and SmackDown in Seattle. Is there any talk this week? They have an interview with Vince about Austin. Is this legit? Did he really quit, or?
Oh, Austin quit. Austin walked out before the TV taping when they were in Atlanta, and you know, everything that they've done since then, that's been real. You know.
Okay, and also I want to know, I'm going to the Raw and SmackDown in Seattle. Is there any talk whatsoever about them ever doing a pay-per-view?
Lots of Tanya.
Because we've never had one pay-per-view here, and that's, like, not fair. We had WCW do one.
Yeah, I remember when WCW did it. Juventud Guerrera and Blitzkrieg, right?
Yeah, that was a hell of a match.
Yeah.
And every time they come, you know, we got 2 nights coming up, and
that's a big test to see how you can do 2 straight nights at the Key Arena. Yeah. Brian, we're totally out of time. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Okay, you're very welcome. I want to thank everyone for joining in on the show. We had a great 2 hours here. Of course, thanks, Brian. Brian, doing real well. Thanks to Ira. Thanks to everybody. We'll see you soon. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network.